Victor Pross speaking to you, anarchist artist. Well, by now the world knows of the Paris terrorist attacks, and there's little that I can report about that isn't already available elsewhere. Over 150 people are dead in Paris, France, as Islamic terrorists attacked 7 sites throughout the French capital, and the worst carnage occurred at a concert hall with at least 112 victims. I don't know what the actual stats are right now. Stefan Molyneux recorded an excellent video, and I do recommend it. And he made an impassioned plea to save Western civilization. And it's exactly Western civilization that I want to talk about in my own video. A nation's long-term direction, or a society's long-term direction, is not set by today's political pundits, but rather by the ideas and ideals that come to dominate a given culture. The dominant intellectual trends depends on a nation's educational systems, which train young minds and impart fundamental ideas and convictions. And if students learn to think rationally and scientifically, and to value themselves and their intellectual independence, the culture will come to reflect that. But if education fails in this task, the culture will degrade and erode. And we see that happening today. The succeeding generations are rendered less able to think and to deal with the abstract requirements of life, and they will be encumbered with a propensity to follow authority, and we see that happening today. And such a nation will not remain free for long. So that brings me to multiculturalism, which is actually relevant and germane to my topic tonight. One of the leading intellectual trends in today's culture is the poisonous evil known as multiculturalism. Now, multiculturalism is a word that is used for two rather different social movements. On the one hand, it stands for the recognition that human beings are fundamentally equal, regardless of ethnic background, and that there are many fine things to be found in cultures all over the world, and I'm fine with that. And this movement can be seen as an attack on European ethnocentrism. That's true, but fundamentally, though, it follows from the ideals of the Enlightenment, and it's entirely consistent with the philosophy of reason and individualism. But multiculturalism also stands for a movement prominent in academic humanities departments that is fundamentally a philosophical attack on objectivity. A fundamental attack on objectivity in epistemology and morality. This is the doctrine that simultaneously and incoherently propounds the equality of all ethnic groups and stridently attacks all aspects of Western thought as corrupt, racist, classist, logocentric, sexist, and consider me an opponent as an opponent of that latter movement. There are fundamental ideas that historically arose in the West that are both true and profoundly important. Logic, the scientific method, science itself, individual rights and property rights, and more generally, individualism, are all of a Western origin. And when academic multiculturalists attack logic or science as ethnocentrism, when they decry capitalism and extol traditional peasant life, when they propound the equality of all moral perspectives, as long as they are group perspectives, they are discarding the philosophical foundation that enabled human beings to prosper on the earth. Logic is not an arbitrary social convention, like the choice between chopsticks and a fork and spoon. Logic is the art of reasoning correctly. Science is not a tool of oppression. It is a tremendous body of knowledge that has liberated the average human being from the bondage of disease, death, and poverty. And not all moral systems are equal. Moral reasoning must proceed on the basis of an objective standards, an appreciation of the value significance of individual life and happiness. An objective ethics is not about a series of fucking commandments, secular or religious, or of group think, let alone racial group think. The academic multiculturalist offers one type of tribalism for another. That's what they're about. Multiculturalism is not really about choosing non-Western clothes, if that's your hippy-dippy thing to do, or listening to world beat music, or enjoying spicy foods, or about rejecting racism, for that matter. Far from it. That's individualism. To choose those things on your own, by your own standards, on your own terms. What clothes you wear, what food you eat. Ethnic diversity is the top priority of a university education today. The politically correct educational establishment takes race, class, and gender as standards for hiring and promoting faculty, and even choosing the content of courses as their standard of value. And while claiming that its primary goal is to eradicate racism, the diversity movement is not imparting knowledge to students or helping them to develop their reasoning skills, but they're promoting the ideas of racism. And we have to ask the question, is ethnic diversity an absolute essential of a college education? Really? It's not. And far from being an essential to a college education, such diversity is a sure road to its destruction. And the so-called ethnic diversity is merely racism in a politically correct disguise. That's what it is. Ethnic diversity is merely racism in a politically correct disguise. And many people have a very superficial understanding or view of racism. They see it merely as the belief that one race is superior to another. It's one aspect of it, but it's much more than that. It is a fundamental and fundamentally wrong view of human nature. Racism is the notion that one's race determines one's identity. It is the belief that one's convictions, values, and character are determined not by the judgment of one's mind, but by one's anatomy or blood. This view propels people to be condemned or praised based on their racial membership. In turn, it leads them to condemn or praise others on the same basis. And in fact, one can gain an authentic sense of pride only from one's own achievements, individual achievements, the sovereign individual, not from inherited characteristics. The spread of racism requires the destruction of an individual's confidence in his own mind. And such an individual then anxiously seeks a sense of identity by clinging to some group, abandoning their autonomy, abandoning their rights and allowing his ethnic group to tell him what to believe. And because he thinks of himself as a racial entity and becomes a separatist as a result, he chooses his friends and his enemies based on ethnicity. And the diversity movement claims that its goals is to extinguish racism and build a tolerance of differences. This is complete and utter fucking bullshit. One cannot teach students that their identity is determined by skin color and expect them to be colorblind. One cannot espouse multiculturalism and expect students to see each other as individual human beings. One cannot preach the need for self-efficacy while destroying the faculty which makes it possible, which is human reason. That's the commonality that we all have around the fucking globe. That's what unites us. That's what bonds us, for Christ's sakes, is our capacity to reason. That is the core of our fucking humanity. Advocates of diversity are bona fide entrenched races in the basic meaning of that term. They see the world through colored lenses, colored by race and gender. And advocates of diversity claim it will teach students to tolerate and celebrate their differences. But the differences that they have in mind are racial differences. Racial identity erects a gulf between people, as though they were different species, for Christ's sakes, with nothing fundamental in common. And if this were true, if racial identity determined one's values and thinking methods, there would be no possibility for understanding or cooperation among the different peoples around the world. Again, reason is the human attribute that ties humanity together around the fucking globe. The ideals, the achievements, and history of Western culture in general are purposely given short shift by multiculturalism, and there's a reason for that. The Industrial Revolution and the Information Age were born and flourished in a Western atmosphere with Western ideals, and the problems of multiculturalism are exasperated by the problems of a complete moral relativism and nihilism. Racism will become an ugly memory only when universities teach a valid concept of human nature, one based on the tenets of the individual's mind as competent, that the human intellect is efficacious, that we possess free will, that individuals are to be judged as individuals, and that deriving one's identity from one's race is a corruption, an intellectual and moral corruption appropriate to Nazi Germany, not to a society based on freedom and independence. Victor Pross signing it out. Anarchist artist. Pop Culture.